Looking at the headline of your story, which is one of the most read on the terminal today, comparing the U.S. economy to a Jenga tower. Why?
Yeah, I think you're right. This is increasingly talked about now, and what we're seeing is that spending is increasingly being driven by those top 20% and even the top 10% of earners. So obviously spending is hugely important to the U.S. economy. It drives 2/3 of economic activity. And the more you concentrate that in one group of people, the more fragile things become, right? So folks are comparing it to a Jenga tower where you're just removing pieces from the bottom and now the middle parts of the tower, and it's becoming more and more top heavy. Well, at some point, does it fall down?
I really enjoy that imagery there of a Jenga tower, Catarina. We do see, as we mentioned earlier, the stock market down today, but it is important to note that the S&P 500 has returned more than 15% this year. I know that the market isn't necessarily the economy here, but what is your sense on the divide between stocks and the U.S. consumer?
Well, I think what it's showing is that that those stock market gains are really supporting the consumption you're still seeing at the top, because we know that stock ownership is really a divided thing in this country as well, right? Most, only if not a huge amount of people in the U.S. own stocks. It's concentrated in the wealthiest individuals. And so when stocks do well, the wealthy spend or keep spending or feel confident enough to spend, right? But it doesn't really help those at the bottom or even a lot of those in the middle because they don't own stocks. In a lot of cases, they also don't own other assets that have been appreciating quickly, like homes, right? So they're not benefiting from those gains. So yes, absolutely, the stock market is still up. The economy is still growing by many measures pretty robustly. So we're not, looking at an imminent recession, but it is, these little things do start to add up, and they just do create a kind of more fragile landscape for the economy.
Yeah, Catarina, because I think you spoke to Peter Atwater, who I'm a big fan of, who really coined that phrase K-shaped recovery. And I know he was posting on social media today about there being a longer leg to the bottom of the K and that upper leg getting a bit smaller or more pinched. What's your read of the state of the economy? Are we continuing to see really the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% of consumers carrying and people having to downgrade? And what are we hearing from companies reporting earnings on that?
Yeah, I think that is really what you're hearing right now. When the economy started recovering from the pandemic, you had pretty widespread benefits at that point. You had lower income folks really seeing their wages increase at a good clip, outpacing inflation and rising faster than wages for those at the top. And now you're really seeing that reverse, which is not a very common situation for the U.S. economy when wages for the higher income earners are rising at a faster pace than those for the bottom. And you're hearing it from companies as well. Across earnings, really over the past few weeks, we've heard that companies are really seeing their bottom line buoyed by those at the top, by luxury spending, things like that. Whereas, the lower end consumers are really not spending. Spending has kind of flatlined. And now, worryingly, you're seeing that creep into more of those middle income consumers. So I think that's where you get into this image of the K, where the bottom leg is really getting bigger. It's like people are going from, perhaps they were, toward the bottom of that top leg, but now they're hopping down to the bottom leg, and their fates are worsening a little bit.
So, of course, we know the shutdown has prolonged to be the longest in all of U.S. history here. And we do have the challenger data, but clearly no inflation data. We are experiencing, of course, a data drought here. But the Fed's Austin Goolsbee pointed to this as a driver of the unease regarding rate cuts. How does this lack of data actually impact expectations for the Fed's next move?
Yeah, I mean, you've really seen expectations come off for the next Fed move, right? At first, before the October meeting, markets were really expecting like 100% chance of another rate cut in December. Now that's really come off. Now, part of that was Chair Jerome Powell in his post-meeting press conference in October really saying that it's not a foregone conclusion that they were going to cut again. But a lot of it is also these comments you're hearing from an increasing number of Fed officials, and they're basically saying that, when things are foggy, when the outlook is uncertain, and when we're not getting new information from really reliable data sources like the government, the prudent thing is to slow down, right? You don't want to kind of depend on data that's now 3 months old in some cases. So you're hearing just more and more Fed officials calling for, hey, let's take a beat, let's maybe not move in December, and let's just see where things are.